A Glance in the Mirror. Chapter 39. Rocky Patch. Sally's answer made me catch my breath. "I'm in love with somebody else." And a cold stare sent a chill down his spine. All over that Christmas Terry gave way to feelings of desolation. Thoughts about all those past exciting, frustrating and annoying times. 23 years of married life, 6 children, and a circle of friends, overlaid now by feelings of anger. He was distressed, felt painfully let down and deserted. Those negative feelings churned away inside him, destroying hopes, clouding dreams, and smothering ambitions. After all the hard work, taking on a new job and having to retrain, gradually his anger and feelings of hopelessness turned to a determination to somehow survive and go on to better things. Terry did try to make overtures, to try and rekindle past affections, but in his heart of hearts he was just going through the motions. Nothing, word or deed, would ever take those hateful words away. Had her words been the only cause of disagreement, he might have gone through a cooling-off period. But they were not. Sally had never had an interest in cultural things. She was no lover of the world's sciences, home improvements, or joy at nature's blessings. Not having any more babies left a void in her that would not be filled. It was an obsession. Logic and reasonableness wouldn't counter its grinding daily pressure on her passions. She was bored and wanted excitement, and be needed again. The children were now no longer sufficient. They did not need her as they had in the past. Trying to retain some sort of mental cohesion after hearing those terrible words bouncing around in his head, Terry blotted out everyday matters and daily words of care which he should have been directing towards his children. It made him feel physically weak. Personal fortunes, financial and social, began to plummet as the true realization that terrible Christmas slowly took its hold. Terry's days seemed to pass with a permanent racing heartbeat and a sense of panic. He was not aware of all the consequences those feelings were to have, although judging from the sinking feelings in his stomach, it did not herald a bright future, nor predict much contentment, and certainly not in the short term. Gradually, over the next few weeks, Terry pulled himself together with the help of his mother-in-law, brother, neighbours and friends at work. But it wasn't easy, trying to put a brave face on life, whilst giving lectures and trying to teach. Often he would hear himself speak, and wonder what on earth he was talking about. From the following January till May, Terry tried to find a way to continue living with the terrible realization that his life was to change irrevocably, that enormous emotional changes were to take place, especially if he were to remain living in the same house with Sally. After much thought, talking the matter through with Rita, Sally's mother, the decision was made. Terry would remove himself and find somewhere else locally where the children could visit and perhaps move in, if they felt the need, or on a fixed rota. The children were in a state of shock. There had been a slow but definite deterioration in each child's bond with each other over the last couple of years. As they had grown up, the lack of privacy and personal space was to have a profound effect. All became withdrawn, operating a small world around their own possessions and interests. This affected all at home, except Simon, who was away at university. They looked to their father to be strong and supportive, but he was wrapped up in his own misery, which, coming on top of the stressful conditions at work, grated on his inner being. It was a house of tension, where hardly a kind word was spoken. Terry accepted the position he found himself in, and for the last time he told Sally to leave if she wished to carry on seeing him, or if she was unhappy with life at Norwood Drive. She replied that she had no intention of leaving or giving up seeing her friend, that he must put up with the situation immediately after Christmas. Terry went to see a solicitor and advised he should keep a note of all conversations and actions and seek a divorce on the grounds of unreasonable behaviour. He emphasised do nothing contentious. A week later, at the second interview, the solicitor advised not to seek custody because this was rarely granted to the father. He seemed surprised that Terry should even want to try. Why, he wondered, would anyone want 6 children? However, if that were what he wanted, he would support him, believing that attempting a reconciliation rarely worked out, that when relationships had reached this point, a separation was the only solution. Terry accepted the situation and gave him his instructions. He would seek a divorce on grounds of unreasonable behaviour and seek custody of the youngest children. When Terry returned to work, he explained to a very kind and sympathetic head of department what the situation was at home. And he replied, "You tell me what hours you can do and what days you need off," and he would alter his teaching program to suit. Terry gave up his studies at Garnet College, dropping out of the degree course and all the technical studies he was engaged in. All charity work Terry stopped except the Harrow Lions, whose annual charity concert at Kodak's Terry was organising. A few weeks later, a family welfare officer was allotted the case. Both Sally and Terry had interviews, and during his he explained he was applying for custody, outlining how his working pattern had been altered to fit in with his home life, to be home when the children came home from school. Over those first few months, Terry made many reports to the social worker and had at least 4 interviews. He kept the social services informed of what was happening, who to contact to find out the facts of the situation. Terry copied in his solicitor after having various meetings with him. All this time he was in communication with Rita, who was a kind friend and supporter. Her house was somewhere where he could go at any time of the day or night. Food would be provided, a drop of sherry and a ginger biscuit, a warm fire, and peace and quiet. Delightful conversation, and everything a harassed person might need was the order of the day. Terry's mother-in-law was a lifesaver and confidant. None could have had a better friend or a person with whom the situation was as well known as he did himself. She offered him a place in her own home to stay, that she could make his, and in that way he could be near to the children, and it would help her out with the maintenance of the house and garden. Terry said how grateful he was for the suggestion, but that he would think it over. Something more permanent should be his goal, though, however. Life continued throughout that Easter term. It was very difficult to concentrate on lectures, for many times Terry found himself listening to what he was saying, which is the very worst position to be in, as it's most distracting. Terry was fortunate that he had been made up to lecturer grade 2 some time before Sally's news destroyed the family's equilibrium. At the end of each term, lecturers sometimes made up a visit to a workplace for the students to see how industry got on, so that they might have a better understanding of technical advances and the latest equipment. During one of these visits, Terry had a conversation with some of the workers, whom he had known before he went into teaching. They told him they were setting up a small factory and wanted a retoucher to do some of the corrections, and would he be interested? At this, Terry jumped at the chance. It was a very good way to find out all the latest methods and to keep his hand in. Terry set up a workplace in the garage using some of the chemicals from college and to start him off. He picked up the positives and a marked proof sheet. From there he started his own business, keeping on with teaching to provide continuity. Playboy magazine made up the bulk of his work. It was funny to see all those films hanging up on the lines, stretched across the roof to dry, but it did provide cash, which would eventually prove to be essential. The social worker returned to interview Ruth and Benjamin, to ask whom they wished to have custody with, their mother or father. Rebecca wasn't asked because it was deemed she was too young to have a considered preference. Benjamin, who was 14 a month later, declared, "I will stay with my mother who needs my support." He turned to Terry, saying, "It isn't that I love you less, it's because I know you will be able to look after yourself." Ruth was 16 that September, her final year at school. The family welfare officer said, "Because Ruth is almost 16, she is the only child whose opinion would be considered by the court as being a principal witness, capable of directing a course of action." Ruth resisted making any choice, saying, "I don't want the responsibility." It was not only an invidious position to put any young person into, but also expedient, taking the responsibility away from the authorities, putting the responsibility onto the shoulders of a 16-year-old. It was a moment that was to have far-reaching effects, upsetting the lives of all those who lived at 68, not just for the moment, but forever. It was a monumental blunder by the authorities. Turning to Sally, the social worker asked, "Will you stay at home in the evenings now?" Sally said, "No, I only stay out because my husband is in the home." These words concluded the final interview. It was this moment which damned Terry's case, led the registrar to rule against him. He wondered how was it that people could be so purposely unkind and mean. At the last visit to his solicitor, Terry told him of the support that he had been offered by friends and neighbours and relatives who would like to speak up for him if asked, to tell the court the facts. That didn't change his mind. These witnesses could only be called to give a character reference or to explain the children's living conditions, he went on to say. The only person who would be listened to would be his mother-in-law, and she would be asked if she could give her opinion to the court. That week Terry saw Rita and talked it over with her, telling her that he needed her to be in the court or else his appeal for custody would have no chance whatever to succeed. And she said, "No, if I do that, Sally wouldn't speak to me ever again." With that, Terry's spirits dropped to the lowest level, knowing that he had lost all hope for custody. There was no way he could prove his point, that he was the fittest to bring up the children. He would be in the home always to see to their care and safety. The court hearing was held in Uxbridge, where Terry had to present his case for custody. Sally was called to the witness box to give her side of the story, repeating what she had told the social worker. After her explanation, her friend too had to give his understandings of the situation and to say what his plans were. He declared to the recorder that he had no intention whatsoever of ever getting married to Sally, and he certainly didn't want anything to do with the children, whatever was decided. The recorder's ruling was made on the strength of the social worker's judgment. Custody was made to Sally as expected. Terry knew then that he would have to leave, nor would drive forever.